We're going to cap off our week of our Wonderful Day in the Lord broadcast by moving into chapter 29 of the book of Job. Job has just finished up chapter 28 with the recognition that the wisdom can only be found in God, and the beginning of wisdom is found in the fear of the Lord, rightly understood. But when we come to chapter 29, I would have to say that Job is anything but wise at this point. He has allowed the circumstances of his life to affect him, to embitter him. But also, I believe chapter 29 is drawing out for us some of the issues in Job's life that God wants to deal with. There's things there inside of him, and hidden perhaps even from himself, that God is going to draw out. And Job reveals his true self in chapter 29. In chapter 29, he begins to long for his past life. And we could understand this. We're not criticizing that particularly. But he says, "Oh, that I were as in months gone by, as in the days when God watched over me. When his lamp shone over my head and his light I walked through darkness. And I was in the prime of my days. And when the friendship of God was over my tent, when the Almighty was yet with me and my children were around me, when my steps were bathed in butter and the rock poured out for me streams of oil." His life was privileged, to say the least, in the past. And he had all these things. He's longing for the good old days, and they were good old days. He's not making it up. Those were wonderful days. His life was like butter, he says, and he wants those back. In verses 7 through 10, he wants them back partly because he longs for the honors that used to be his. In verse 7, he says, "I went out to the gate of the city. When I took my seat in the square, the young men saw me and hid themselves. The old men arose and stood. The princes stopped talking, put their hands on their mouths. The voice of the nobles were hushed, and their tongues stuck to their palate." Later on, in verses 21 to 22, he picks this up again. He says, "So they listened and waited and kept silent for my counsel. After many words, they did not speak again, and my speech dropped on them." Verse 25, I chose a way for them and sat as chief. I dwelt as a king among the troops and one who comforted the mourners. Job not only had a wonderful past life, he had tremendous honors. And he ticks those off. He loves those. He liked the day when people looked to him and thought he was wonderful. They elevated him. They placed him on a pedestal. And Job liked that. He liked that position. He longs for it again. He wants people once again to honor him as someone especially wonderful and great and marvelous. And he longs for that. He misses those days. In verses 12 to 17, he begins to talk about his past deeds that he's done. And he really lays it on here because, verse 12, "I delivered the poor who cried for help, and the orphan who had no helper, and the blessing of the one ready to perish came upon me, and I made the widow's heart sing for joy. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a turban," still proclaiming his self-righteousness here. "I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy. I investigated the case which I did not know. I broke the jaws of the wicked and snatched the prey from their teeth." Job sees himself as his wonderful deliverer, rescuer of all these people who needed his help. And perhaps he actually did those things. We're not saying he did not do that. His friends said he didn't. Job has denied that. And so we would think that Job is at least partially being accurate, maybe completely accurate in what he had done in the past. But again, he's doing so because of a reason. And here it is in verse 18. He thought this was what he deserved in verse 18 because of all of his good stuff. He says, "I thought I shall die in my nest. I shall multiply my days as the sand." What we're picking up here is Job looks at his achievements, his accomplishment, his good deeds, the way other people saw him and honored him, and so forth. And he saw these things as deserving of God's honor upon him. That God should honor him, God should benefit him, God should bless him, because of all these wonderful things that he has done. Something is wrong in Job's understanding. Has he been doing all these things, and we cannot deny these are many good things, has he been doing them primarily because he expected God to reciprocate? And God would give him that which would be wonderful because Job was wonderful. This is coming out in Job, and this is not pleasant. But Job is very unhappy, and he begins to talk about that in verse 1 of chapter 30. But now, he says, but now everything has changed. Job is a frustrated man who believes in his own self-righteousness, and he believes that God should be blessing him because he's such a blessing to everyone else. Something has gone wrong in Job's understanding. God's going to straighten that out, and we'll look at more of that next week.